back table. There's 3 applications, a copy of our red cap sheet, and some additional information. If you want to grab that on the way in, so we can do this as a hands-on kind of workshop. Oh, there's more. And if we run out, find a partner to sit with.
The ink needs to be changed, but.
All right, it's noon, so we're gonna get started. Please enjoy your lunch. So I'm Abhiram Kandaji. I'm the Associate Program Director for the General Surgery Program at South Point Hospital, affiliated with the Cleveland Clinic. This is Noah Belkaya. He's one of our second-year residents who will be co-presenting this with me. So we are going to be presenting on what we as a program have done as a holistic and try to objectify the review process, which historically in our program had been a little bit more subjective. We had our program director was single-handedly going through all 400 plus applications. I'm sure some of your programs are much, much bigger, and you have a lot more to go through and trying to figure out which of these candidates was going to be awarded a interview process. We want to get all of our key stakeholders in our program involved, and how do we do that is what we came together and essentially came up with a rubric. And if you were listening to some of the other speakers throughout the rest of the conference here, you'll see that we have very similar models. I think there's some stuff I will be taking back home with me after listening to some of them. Essentially, the objective is to introduce the rubric that we use, talk to you about a platform that you can use to record all your data points, one that will actually help with doing the calculation in the back end. And then how do you actually go about evaluating the ERAS application? So we talk about these quote unquote intangibles. So I think other places may describe this as attributes. And how do you take that into painting the full picture of the applicant? Ultimately, you want to make sure that when you're reviewing these characteristics, the academics, that you're aligning those with the mission of your program and that it fits in with the culture of your program. We have seen it where residents who come in and don't necessarily mesh well with the culture either struggle or it creates a disruption in the culture you already have that might be thriving. Disruption isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes it brings about positive change, but you'll have to make that decision as you go through the process. And ultimately, if you have sub-internships or audition rotations, as we call them, you want to take some of these characteristics from the review process and bring those into the application for your auditions so that ultimately those candidates that you end up rotating with you ultimately end up interviewing. You don't want to do a first come, first serve basis and ultimately have candidates that you don't interview and you end up dismissing them. Noah, do you want to take over?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Noah, I'm one of the PGY2s. So just to recap what Dr. Kandaji was saying, the goal of our application process is to do both an objective review of an individual, but keep it holistic. We think the way, obviously, that we've done it is the best. I'm sure everyone will, prefer their own positions, but the goal of this is to make sure that we choose individuals, like Dr. Kandaji was saying, who will not only survive residency, but thrive and go on to be excellent surgeons. So in this holistic review process, we make sure that we involve obviously not just the faculty and staff, but the residents as well. And we all feel that we have equal input in determining who we're going to have come join us and who eventually we will train with. And just kind of finally, this is all kind of recapped when we do our town halls at the end of every year to make sure that we are all agreeable on who we would like to come to our program.
We also conduct a town hall before we start the process to reintroduce what we have done, take some feedback from the prior cycle and make changes. So this whole process is an ongoing continuous improvement process for us. So we're always trying to look to refine it based on what our graduates are doing, where they're going for either fellowships or practice, and what the needs of our community and the program are.
So just to make sure that what we're doing kind of aligns with the goals of the program in its entirety, we follow our mission statement, which is written up here. Each program will have their own, but we believe strongly in providing a safe and supportive learning environment to allow surgeons in our program to progress and grow, both personally and professionally, which will result in becoming competent, emotionally intelligent, successful, community-based general surgeons. Like Dr. Kandaji was saying early on in the beginning, the goal is always to select a group of individuals whose intangibles or attributes align with the goals of your program. So just real quick, and you have this on, most of you have this on a piece of paper in front of you. We use a program called REDCap to assist us with the application process. And on the application itself, we have what we've listed up here as a selection of intangibles that we as residents and of course the faculty and staff go through, and we are allowed to select up to 10. Just to highlight a few here, obviously things that we respect in our program, people who did well on their audition rotation, individuals with advanced degrees, suggest some real life experience outside of straight education, greater than 2 years of healthcare experience, and other things outside of medicine completely, those who have accomplishments in competitive sports or music, or even any other aspects of artistry. And of course, things like volunteerism are important to us as well.
So all these intangibles, we've assigned a single point to them. So the max anybody single candidate can get is 10 for the intangibles. There's more than 10 intangibles that we do have listed. You can see couples matching is one. One of our faculty has a soft spot as he had gone through couples matching for those candidates. So we included that as part of our intangibles.
And then this is just a continuation of the application, which highlights some other components. The things that we highlight, of course, we prefer and we require that individuals pass step 1 or level 1 in order to review them. And then, of course, we have other components of this like research experience. And within that, we rank those as objectively as we can, depending on how successful their research experience has been. And then we give candidates the benefit of the doubt. If they took both step 1 and level 1 or step 2 and level 2, we try to give them the benefit of the doubt by taking their kind of highest score. That's changing now, obviously, with some alterations to pass fail among the licensing exams. And then continuing on, which you'll be able to see on your handout as well, we also emphasize things like the score on the letter or the content of the letters of their recommendation, how well we think that their personal statement represents their goals that align with our program. And then just overall, once we get to the end of the application, we quite simply put whether or not we think they would be a great fit and they deserve an interview. As you can see at the bottom, when we do, we request our reviewers to give impressions.
So at this point, are there any questions that we can try to? Yes, sir.
So two questions for you, maybe 3. One, how do you deal with the overwhelming volume to find these things out? 2, your rubric would entirely exclude international grads. Because international grads don't do sports and they don't do community service, primarily focused on academics. And so how do you ensure you're looking at things like sports participation, art participation, that will exclude a tremendous number of folks right out of the gate. So how do you account for that?
So I'll address the international student component. Our hospital does not sponsor J1 or H1 visas. So by that nature alone, that we have that on our website. So those students automatically are not able to participate. So that you know, kind of weeds them out, unfortunately. But for those programs that do sponsor, that is a very valid point. So that is something to consider, and maybe that could go under the category of lot of, you know, the long path that they took to get here. Something else that could be put in the intangibles, like, are they international student? Sorry, could you repeat your first question?
The first one was average program
The
getting
volume.
nearly 600 applicants. And every application being close to 30 to 35 pages. How do you actually screen
Right. So,
before you go through your in-depth? Because your in-depth stuff is wonderful, but how do you actually screen people to give the in-depth?
sure.
holistic review?
So the question, since we're being recorded, I'm just reiterating the question. How do we deal with the volume of applications and especially larger programs? So our initial screens are done through the ERAS system itself. We do have filters for those candidates who failed either level 1 or step 1 on the first try. So if they did not pass, that was an automatic removal from our screening process, which actually does knock down maybe about 60 or rather, you know, 60 applications or so that fall in that category. We are a smaller program, so we don't tend to get that many applications, but I can see where that could be a problem for the bigger ones. So you can set some selection criteria within your ERAS to help filter that down.
Maybe one last question, Dave. Having served as an associate dean at Mosque Catholic School as now.
Yeah.
What do you do when how do you interpret someone who fails USMLE passes? It's a very common issue.
Yeah.
How do you do that in your theory?
So in our system, we are giving, as Dr. Belka said, the benefit of the doubt. So we do tend to give the pass the ability, but if we are, this is one where we come together as a group and decide, you know, if this is a situation, how do we want to proceed? And is the number of candidates that fall in that category overwhelming or not? If it's a few, then we say we'll give them the benefit of the doubt and take them with the complex as a pass. If there's an overwhelming amount of students that are in that situation, then maybe that's exclusion.
I think sometimes there are also things attached to that too, right? Like sometimes individuals experience life events or something like along that line that causes a, you know, an intermittent decline and their performance suffers as a result. But that's a very small minority, as you've indicated.
And we take that into account. So we put those applications kind of on the aside. And if there's somebody that came in audition with us and they can explain in their personal statement, you know, this is a circumstance like family member died. I had a hard time with the test, but otherwise they are stellar. We do leave room in our interview process for 1 or 2 applications or candidates who would meet those exceptional criteria that we can still interview. Yes, ma'am.
More and more schools are moving away from any kind of class rank or any distinction. Classes in the future sports where the time students, they don't have enough rank. They put the middle, they get the top and the bottom, and how do you cover that?
Sure. So the question was regarding class rank, and that a lot of schools are getting away from class rank. So what we have found, there's a handful of very few that don't have any kind of classification data, where they either don't have a GPA or they don't have some kind of quartile system. But if you look at the MSPE, there's a few in there where they don't specifically quartiles or a rank, but they will describe the student as being exceptional with clinical excellence or some other metric. And we take that to say this is their way of breaking down the quartile. The one thing that we've discovered is certain schools, their clerkship grades tend to be either very lenient are very hard. And this is part of our internal evaluation to see how are we going to evaluate these students and be more even. And this is where the quality improvement component comes into our evaluation process, where this is our second year doing this. And as we are gathering more and more data, we're going to start to see that certain schools have a preference for easier clerkship grades versus others. All right. Yes. So far, what we've empirically noticed is that we've had more residents who did not necessarily rotate with us. So we only take 2 residents a year, but historically, we always took those residents that were rotators. Now we've actually taken maybe 50% of, since implementing this, that had not rotated. So Dr. Belkite is actually an example who did not rotate with us, but he matriculated into our program. Our PGY1, one of them did not rotate with us, but matriculated and is doing excellent. And the upcoming class, one of them did not rotate with us and they're matriculating. Actually, both of them did, but they just happened to do well. Yes. Mhm. Very good question. So the question is regarding residents looking at applications and those involved in the review process and interview process. So during the town hall, we ask residents for volunteers because we know that the clinical duties and other life events are happening for them as well. And we want to make sure we are taking that into account. So residents are allowed to look at the full application. They do have access to the program director's website, and those applications are assigned from our administrator. So those, the residents are going in and filling in the score on the red cap as well. And we know who the residents were because it's assigned. So we know if a score is deviating a lot from one particular person, even staff, that maybe we need to look at that a little bit more closely. So yeah, and our residents participate. So the way our residents participate in the interview process is that we have rooms. Sometimes we'll do paired faculty, but the residents are typically done in a group setting. So there are a bunch of residents with one interview candidate. We did this with Zoom. In the same way, we had a room like this and we had a camera in the front of the room so that the candidate can see all the residents and they would take turns. Usually the chief residents, the 4th years in this case, would take lead and the 5th years would be there as supplemental interviewers as they know the culture of the program the best within the resident cohort. And then everybody else would also be participating to see how it's done and to also provide feedback. Yeah. Yes, sir.
So is this for reviewing application? Or both?
It's both. So what we have done is that we give about 70% of the value to the application. So this is the objective component. We found that the interviews can be very subjective. Maybe the candidate is nervous, but they look stellar on paper. So we really want to make sure that we highlight their positive added attributes. And we found this way was most objective for us, helps us to eliminate some of our biases. Of course, having been here and listening to a lot of other folks, there's been a lot of talks around the DEI component as well. And, figuring out how that will play into our evaluation process. We split them up. Yeah.
Okay, so multiple people look at the same application side.
Correct. And then the whole premise of doing the town hall on the front end is to make sure that we're all on the same page. And because again, we're a very small group so that we can make sure that that is what's happening. If there's any questions, we can help mitigate any confusion that may exist. Yes, sir.
Getting back to the questions about some level playing field that full picture of student, especially grades.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and that's still something we're still trying to figure out. What is that factor that we need to account for, and how do we do that? I think as we get more applications through our process, we'll start to see that. And quite frankly, I think, you may have heard of Cortex through Thalamus. I wonder if an AI system like that may be helpful in trying to balance the system. So I'm hopeful that that's where we're headed. But of course, not all programs have funding or have the resources to be able to afford an AI system. And so we wanted to give you a analog, as it were, system to help with this.
I think one of the real strengths is that you've looked at your own culture, figured out what's important for you. And I think that every residency has a totally different view on ranking and what their values are. For me personally, I think there's a threshold. And if you're above that threshold, in my mind, the rank list doesn't really matter, right? Like 237 versus 250 on the USMLE. To me, it doesn't matter. But every place is different. In fact, I know 2 program directors now in the past world who are bringing in people, interviewing them, and then just putting them into a straight lottery.
Wow.
Not even ranking. Just putting them in straight lottery, thinking that they've met the threshold. We have no control over that. So I like the way you create it.
Thank you. So yes, regarding the pass, no pass, we always use that as an initial filter for the level 1, step 1. And the step 2, level 2 is also what we take into account. Again, we're looking at scores, but as you said, there's a threshold. So we put it into are you above a standard deviation, or are you within average to 1 standard deviation? So that is our the minutia that we do break it down into for our component. And then our program, we look at research more of, can you understand how the sausage is made kind of situation? Can you actually look at research information and digest it, and to see how you can apply it to your own patient population? Not so much that we're driving our residents to be research, surgeon scientists necessarily. Of course, if your program is geared towards that, maybe that's where you put the emphasis on your point allocation is on the research component. Maybe that's where you want to drive your focus. And so I think what we want to do is provide you a framework that will allow you to change the point allocation that you want for your own program, so that you can put the emphasis where you want. And, we talk about how the holistic process is done, but we wanted to give this avenue to try to put it into practice. And we actually provided 3 applications from our own resident pool this year to see how they would rank up against your program, and to see if, does everybody have the same candidate at their top, middle, bottom, or is it varied? And my suspicion is that their candidates will not all be in the same rank order for every program. Sir. So we were familiar with RedCap, and it was free to us. The second component is I was able to assign points on the back end. So when I go in, I'm just going to go to that slide so you can see what this is what my Excel sheet looks like. There's a lot of, the subcategories are all color coded. So it brings in a lot of numbers, and I can do sub calculations. So what we essentially did was, once the total scores were done, we did the statistical calculation on doing the mean, the quartiles, and then essentially, as a program, we decided anybody in the upper quartile would be afforded an interview within the confines of how many interviews can we actually give. So that's why we did RedCap. I'm not completely familiar with how ERAS does that calculation. So that's why we ended up using RedCap.
mistakes and errors, but it's really fun. So we actually tried to use the past year, and anytime you're adding something for in errors, it's 2 extra clicks, and you can go in there, then do the score, then make sure it comes back out. And so, to be honest, I applaud the use of this to get everything all together, because when we tried to, we thought we were being really proactive in using the system, and the system unfortunately just isn't advanced enough that you can click everything in the same place. So I think it's gonna get there, but for right now, this makes perfect sense.
Thank you. All right, so if you have an application or if you're with someone that's sitting next to you that has applications, we want you to go and take some time, look through. So I think the way you want to maybe go about this is figure out those characteristics, those intangibles that you think would be part of the culture of your program. So intangibles really fit with the culture. And then there's the academics, the competitiveness, and that was where you will look at their standardized tests, how they did in their class, how they fall into their quartile, and then you can look at their clerkship. So that's the academia part, their performance. Sir.
I have those that. The only reason is he put an electric motor in his auto respiration, so that's why the lower part of our top 10, because we would have been at the top 10.
It's going well.
Yeah. So when we do all of this, we have those candidates that are then selected for an interview. So they come and then we collectively, and this is something that we are reviewing within our program, is we know these candidates are good. We've selected them based on the application. Now, how do we give value to the interview process? And this is where maybe you can change the weight now that you have really good candidates, to weight more towards the interview process. So instead of being very subjective in the screening, you can be objective in the screening, and then you can be a little bit more, does this person, when they talk to you, do they feel like somebody that you could work with for the next 5 years? And as previous mentors have mentioned, you're married to this person for the next 5 years. So is this somebody that you are going to be happy with for the next 5 years? And the way the residents always said it when they're looking at candidates and telling the students, it's like, we're looking to see if you're somebody at 2 o'clock in the morning and I'm deep in somebody's bowels, am I going to be able to call you? You're going to come and help me? And, or if it's like 2 o'clock in the morning and I need to grab a drink with somebody, are you going to be willing to come out and grab a drink with me? So I think that speaks to the culture component. So again, going back, just looking at the intangibles, think about what you would think. Sorry. Correct.
So I'm just curious, if you're trying to extrapolate it to a 7-person per year
Mhm.
program, what number of applications do you start with that you then go to review and then go to interview?
Okay.
What's the number?
I believe we have close to 700 or 800 applications. It comes down to about 400, like 350, 400 that end up actually going through the review process. So some of that is the international graduates, since we don't offer a visa sponsorship, but they still end up applying, even though it's clearly stated. So that eliminates some of those candidates. We are osteopathically recognized, so we do have requirements for osteopathic training as well. So MD candidates are applicable or can apply to our program as well. They just would have to be participating in the osteopathic training. So if they have not shown interest or do not have some prerequisites, then they will also be removed from their process. So we have approximately 400 or like 350 to 400 essentially osteopathic candidates that are filtering through our program. Now, if you expand that to 700 programs, or 7 positions a year, again, we break it down by quartile. So we interview up to 10 to 12 candidates per day. And we have 3 interview dates. So essentially we have about anywhere from 36 to 40 interviews. Again, we have that 1 or 2 extra position flexibility per interview day. if somebody has made contact with the program director or somebody within our faculty or residents that has some outstanding circumstance, or they happen to be rotating with us when the interview process is done, and we want to grant them an interview at that time, that we have the flexibility to do so.
Could I understand you to say that somebody is not an osteopath?
That's not true.
I may have
yeah.
misunderstood.
So allopathic candidates apply to our program. We look to see if they have any osteopathic interests and or have demonstrated prior experience or willingness to participate in osteopathic training, as that is part of the requirements for maintaining osteopathic recognition. I understand that there are multiple osteopathic societies in every state, so they do run courses. So if any MD candidate has taken those courses or participated in those training sessions, then we look at that as well. Sir.
And of those, how many of those applications were reviewed by more than?
So no single application was initially reviewed by more than one reviewer. We have 6 core faculty and we have currently 14 residents, but our core resident cohort is actually 10. So we had approximately 10 residents, so that's 14 to 16. So how many applications did each person review? It could be anywhere from 15 to 20. Sometimes if somebody is falling behind, if somebody else has already gotten through their process, we ask them, are you able to help so that we can get this done in a timely manner? So we have a bunch of intangibles up that we use. Are there any others that you may want to consider? So you mentioned competitive sports and international students. So one of the this whole selection process was going through talking to everybody in our program. Our program director felt really strongly about competitive sports as it demonstrates teamwork and grit. And we know that grit is a key component of doing well in a surgical training environment. So that's why competitive sports was brought up as one of those professional athletes. It's practice, 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 as we just saw our keynote speakers talk to us about. So that includes either performing arts or the fine arts. And if there's somebody that maintains that level as they've gone through training or through medical school as well. Awards in medical school, the above and beyond component, the scholarships, again, above and beyond. Volunteerism, we want to look for the altruistic behaviors as well. And we're looking for consistency in volunteerism rather than just the sporadic, I did, an hour here, an hour there. And we do, and we broke it down actually to a level of, were you a participation, was your leadership at a national level? Were you, the student section leader of the College of Surgeons or another national organization? And what did you actually do in it? Because I feel like there are students who take these national roles and it's a title, but what did they actually accomplish? And so we do get into that as well. And we try to look for those details in their application. And again, we allocate, we broke it down on a 10-point scale on ours, but you can change the scale how you want. Yes, sir. Yeah. So signaling is part of it. And we looked at regional signals. Our program director specifically told candidates who rotated with us not to signal and to save their signal for another program. So that, because we already know that they're interested since they have already demonstrated that by coming to our program to do a sub internship and audition. And then we look to see if, were they well liked on the audition, because there are some candidates who look great on paper. We give them the initial and then they just don't mesh well. And I think that's where we see red flags. Yeah, sir. Yeah, so this one is one of our faculty members. He had gone through the couples matching process and thought it was a very arduous thing. So this was kind of like maybe something that would help increase it's by 1 point. It's something very small, but so we included in there. So this was one of those, okay, we'll give it to you kind of thing. There wasn't a hard basis on that one. It was just,
You're trying to help the person that's having a tough time, they have significant other.
correct, yeah. And we, so if there's somebody that is selected ultimately to interview, we do ask them those questions and then try to figure out what their significant other is trying to go into. Our hospital itself, we have our general surgery, orthopedics, internal medicine, and anesthesiology. So we don't have psychiatry and everything else, but because we're affiliated with a bigger institution, we know we look at the region as a potential match, and if their significant other has demonstrated some potential to be there, and we find that this candidate is higher on our list, then I think, it's upon the program leadership to help make some avenues to help match. So I think that's where the program director and myself will try to start reaching out. Now,
Actually ended up separating on them on our list for 3 years. Both of them, which is maybe not fair. It's great how.
so very valid point. We luckily have not run into that situation. But when we did have a couple both applying to general surgery, the thoughts that were around it was, if they're gonna want to take vacation together or something, then how do we adjust call schedule? Ultimately, those folks ended up going to a bigger program because I think they had the flexibility to be able to negotiate that. So we tell them, this is the situation, this is to a year, and we're very, I would say, transparent. But that was before we started implementing this process. Sir.
People, but you're. Yeah, top 30, and that's. Is there, does the program director and you, like, let's say someone at 32,
Mhm.
you glanced at their application, it was, they needed one more point. You looked at the USMP, and let's say there was a story behind it, and you're like, that, so is there any leeway like that, or is it a hard number and that's it, and that's where you stop?
So I think the benefit of looking at those applications individually and going and doing that instead of just relying on a computer program is that you can make those exceptions and really look at the story. Because again, if they're stellar and everything else, and the only thing is they had this really hard life event that happened, then, you don't want to take something away from them because you're essentially changing their life trajectory. So we go back and look at that. And if it's somebody that does meet those exceptional criteria, we do afford them that interview. I'm gonna go in the back there first. So multiple hand come up first. Prior failure on. So if it's somebody that took both the COMLEX and the USMLE, we'll take the pass. But if somebody's had a failure, then no, we don't, because I think it's just overwhelming to look at all those applications and somebody that's already done well. So, again, it also looks, I don't know if the felony component is still listed, but if somebody does have like a felony that they have listed, sometimes that rules them out from our program. Over here.
Then doing this review and generating that list of who to invite, were you like, how long did that take? Like, did you use that for a standard first round interview time that we were kind of encouraged to use this past year?
So we gave our reviewers approximately 2 weeks from the time the list was released. Our program coordinator set everything up with splitting up the groups. And so some people were a lot faster than others. And of course, clinical duties, may interfere with how much time they have. So we gave that. And then if anybody did get done earlier and had the bandwidth to do some more, they were able to do so. And we did follow on the guidelines to wait to offer interviews so that the playing field was evened.
Once they finish reviews, like how long did this massaging of the number and generating of this take? Is that a fairly quick process because of the spreadsheet feature?
Yeah, the spreadsheet nature makes it very, very easy. I was able to bring this over as an Excel file, color code everything. It had the AAMC numbers as well. And then just do, sub calculations, and using just the statistical power of Excel was able to break down all this information really easily. I would say, actual work time, 15-20 minutes. Yeah. Sir.
And you might get those, but how does your signal fit into this? How does, after the interview process, or before you get there, is you, take the name and everything, all picture of the partner application? You kind of, make it anonymous from that standpoint. And then the last thing is that, they had a comment in the meeting earlier, that the one gentleman said he puts no credence into email follow-up. And you have a thing on the bottom here that talks about, you're really trying to gauge their interest. And to me, it's, you don't get anything back from an interview. Just even a thank you. You kind of get, I don't know how that would work in my mind. I just can't wrap my mind with that.
Yeah. So the,
That's actually very. Position statement. Here's that's it. Okay. So it's like, I was always the same. I would want to see, hey, are you as interested in us as we are in you? And, but some places are like, do not accept any. And so I think the students, the applicants.
Well, if you set that playing field, but that playing field is not set.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, someone that's been closer to the application process, you're not told not to send an email.
Right.
It's, I don't know, I think to be common courtesy, send a follow-up
Mhm.
email. I don't know. That maybe I might make calls.
I mean, sorry, go ahead. I usually say, I being closer to the process, but I always send a thank you follow-up, usually, because I'm happy that I got an interview. And obviously, regardless of how it went, you at least want to take the time to say it's nice to meet you, because the interactions may come around in the future.
Yeah.
So I think it's reasonable. I'm not sure. I'm surprised that you have candidates who don't send emails of thanks.
Yeah.
But that's an aside.
so the first question was regarding the signaling. So signaling, so when we look at this, we do have intangible signaling as one of those components. And again, we specifically tell auditioners not to signal, to save that signal for somebody else. So that way they can maximize their output. Hopefully that also decreases the overall number of applications they have to send out. So we do look at that. If somebody, again, is on the fence on our scoring system, did they signal us? Is that somebody that, we need to entertain, maybe because they have a family connection or something there that maybe that's why they're really looking at us. So we do, again, retrospectively go and look at those things as well. And in terms of communication, so once they have interviewed with us, the program director makes a very explicit statement at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day that, you may send us, not encouraging, but if you do send us rather, any correspondence after this, do not expect a response, because that is just so that everyone is on the same playing field. So when we look at that, we don't, and when we start putting a rank order together, we don't even bring up any emails or anything that was sent. Unless it was something like, hey, I got into the military match, I'm pulling out, or something else, where if somebody isn't higher on their list, then we need to remove them, kind of situation.
Name of the
Yes, that's a really good question. So blinding the applications, the pictures are all removed. There's a whole bunch of other things that, at institutional level that is blinded. Names are not, blinded, but our sheet here looks at the AMC, when we are looking at the scores so that we don't have anything specifically tied to a person when the scores are being evaluated. But about taking out the name, I believe gender is removed, date of birth is removed. I think the name may be left, but that is something that we could potentially be blinding in the future as well to help mitigate some unrecognized biases. And as the next review process comes up, one of the things that has been generated within our GME circle at the institution level was to, before the process start, help recognize those unrecognized biases before we do it and bring to the forefront. Like, these are the things that you may encounter, and to acknowledge it and then to see how you would work past it. Sir. So we start our interview day around 8 or 9 in the morning, 15-minute per candidate. And then and we go up until noon. So half day, more or less, of interviews. And that's how many people we're able to accommodate with how many faculty we have and how many residents.
You made a decision to say, we're gonna do, for our 2 spots, we're gonna do 30. How did you come up with that number of 30? So, for example, I manage a program with 7 categoricals a year.
Mhm.
We can struggle with how many interview spots should we offer to the entire group in terms of matching or 7? And I was just interested in the strategy that we use for matching or 2.
Yes.
I grew up with a total number of slots.
So yeah, that's going back on our historical match. So we have typically matched within our top 10 for several years. So we had that buffer of 20, but this last year, our program had decided to go back to doing in-person interviews, and we saw quite a few cancellations. So that's something that we're gonna have to go back and look at to see if we need to switch back to doing virtual to make sure that we have candidates that are good candidates that can sustain their interview date. I think we did lose a few to conflicts. It went into the signaling pool, not program specific. So either if they signaled the region or signaled the pool, they were still given the signal point. Mhm. Right. I think that concludes our time. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for the questions. That touchscreen. Oh. Where's it?
Yeah, it was like a slide.
Professional mode.
I guess I emailed you.